Okay, thanks very much. And I just want to say what a privilege it is to follow Tony. We first met several years ago in Stoke Newington, and it's lovely to see you again. Anyway, it's my intention today to talk about the relationship between the church and reparations. And I want to start with a small example to illustrate some of the arguments that we are up against. There's a memorial to Thomas Corker in the Church of King Charles the Martyr in Falmouth. He was an agent for the Royal African Company in West Africa, where he married a member of the local African ruling class and started a dynasty of slave traders. Following a pamphlet outlining his connection to the trafficking in enslaved Africans and a local campaign calling upon the church to remove the memorial, the vicar has covered the memorial with a cloth, a bit like one deals with a noisy parrot. Meanwhile, Dr. Zahir Mazani said in response, and I quote, "Monuments like this were erected when slavery was widely published across the world, and they need to be seen and preserved in context. 17th century slavers like this were often also major charitable benefactors. Strange that we forget their charity while demolishing their memorials. Yet in fact, throughout history, the reverse has been true. Businessmen trumpeted their charity and hide the origins of their wealth, while stone memorials frequently do more to conceal history than to illuminate the past." The response of Dr. Mazani is typical of right-wing historians who defend enslavers. Many of them are based around a website called History Reclaimed. There's another memorial in a church causing problems. There's one of Tobias Rustat, who gave over £10,000 to the Church of England and to Jesus College, University of Cambridge. Clearly a man much concerned about his reputation amongst future generations, so his donations to church and university can be seen as just so much whitewash. Tobias Rustat was the subject of a failed attempt by the master of Jesus College to have his memorial removed from the college chapel because of his links to the slave trade, a memorial that he paid for himself during his own lifetime and stored in his house for 8 years until it could be erected in Jesus College on his death. The request for its removal was turned down by a church court, which found that widespread opposition to the memorial was based on what they called a false narrative about the scale of the financial rewards Rustat gained from enslavement, and ordered that the memorial should remain in the chapel. The judgment was made by the Deputy Chancellor of the Duchess of Ely, David Hodge QC, who said the removal of the Rustat memorial would cause considerable or notable harm to the significance of the chapel as a building of special architectural or historic interest. He went on to say that Rustat only made a limited part of his wealth from slavery. His initial investment in the Royal African Company was only £400, but a bonus in 1691 brought his shareholding up to £1,600, nearly £5 million today. Add to this the so-called modest 7% per annum dividends, and that he was a director of the Royal African Company, for which he was well paid. Well, you wonder how much he would have had to have actually made for the ecclesiastical court to see it as substantial. Is a crime less of a crime because the criminal did not make the expected gains? But in this case, this is an ingenious way to avoid the main argument. The real problem with this memorial, as well as with other memorials and statues of those who profited or attempted to profit from the business of slavery, is that they glorify and honour men who were guilty of a crime against humanity. Professor Lawrence Goldman suggested that in trying to cancel, as he put it, Rustat, the college was attempting to, and I quote, "assort carefully selected aspects of its past, which could lead to further calls for removal of memorials to other historical figures elsewhere." As he said, Other figures from the past, equally bad or even worse, would also have to be removed and cancelled. Why does Professor Goldman find such difficulty in removing any number of statues that commemorate those guilty of crimes against humanity? The Church of England, which was the official church of the British Empire and therefore an arm of the state, struggled with its conscience over the question of African enslavement, but quickly triumphed over any doubts about the legitimacy of enslaving Africans. They were greatly assisted in this by Christopher Codrington, who bequeaths a profitable sugar estate in Barbados and 300 enslaved labourers to the church's missionary wing. Thus, their complicity was relatively cheaply purchased. If it were not for his will, Christopher Codrington might have entered history as just one more plantation owner and colonial administrator, albeit probably slightly more cultured and perhaps less brutal than most of his fellows. Christopher Codrington, while leaving the majority of his wealth, lands and enslaved labourers to his cousin William Codrington, also left £10,000, worth about 30 million today, and his 12,000 book collection to All Souls College of the University of Oxford, as well as leaving his estates in Barbados, with 315 enslaved workers included, to the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts, which had been founded by William III in 1701 as the official overseas missionary wing of the Church of England. This latter bequest was worth 30,000, worth 93 million today, and the product and produced an income of £2,000, or roughly 6 million today's money, a year income. As far as Codrington himself is concerned, there is no regret about how he made his money, no change of heart about his treatment of his enslaved labourers, just a mawkish sentimentality about religion and a practical realisation of its ideological effectiveness. During his 1711 annual sermon to the Society of the Propagation of the Gospel, William Fleetwood, Bishop of St Asaph of the Church in Wales, spoke of some misconceptions that slave owners had about baptism and manumission and the selling of baptized slaves. He assured them that baptism did not free the slave. Furthermore, if they could be sold before they were baptized, the laws of Christ would not deprive the owners of that property after baptism. Above all, he reasserted the enslavers' right to decide the fate of the oppressed without their consent. He believed that the ownership of 300 enslaved labourers by the society enabled it to preach by example and show their fellow slaveholders that a profitable enslaved labour plantation was compatible with Christianity. The Society for the Propagation of the Gospel inserted into the intended baptism ritual for enslaved converts, and I quote, "You declare in the presence of God and before this congregation that you do not ask for the holy baptism out of any desire designed to free yourself from the duty and obedience you owe to your master while you live, but merely for the good of your soul and to partake in the graces and blessings promised to the members of the Church of Jesus Christ." However, making profits and making converts proved incompatible, with the Bible in one hand and the whip in the other, and I quote, "By 1726, 16 years after the death of Christopher Codrington, not one of the society's slaves had been baptized." The practice of branding the word society on the chests of all enslaved labourers coming into the possession of the society cannot have endeared these missionaries for the Lord Jesus Christ to the potential convert, nor was it really likely to be seen as a sign of God's mercy. Whether Christopher Codrington actually cared for the spiritual welfare of the enslaved or not, we cannot know. If, however, the purpose of his legacy to the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel was to secure his good name for future generations, then he was remarkably successful. Until Catherine Gerbner wrote Christian Slavery in 2018, or Janice McLean Farrell and Michael Ashton Clark wrote Missions in Contested Spaces in 2021, it's hard to find any writer with a bad word to say about Codrington. His chief hagiographer, George Simmons, wrote 3 eulogies in the 1970s, typical of which: Codrington College in Barbados, British West Indies, stands as a monument to its founder, Christopher Codrington the Younger. Munificent indeed as the bequest was, it was ennobled by the life and character of its giver. The official history of Codrington College, written in 1988, but still prominently on the college's website, says that his concern for the slaves made him many enemies amongst the planter class. The fact that, that Codrington Estate, as they put it, thrived on slave labour for 2 centuries is buried towards the end of the pamphlet. As late as 2022, Robert Jackson, a former MP for Wantage and Fellow of All Souls College, University of Oxford, argued that Codrington sought to do the best that he could within the limits of his capabilities, and even goes as far as to say that Codrington may be understood to have been in the vanguard of absolutism. Codrington's bequest to All Souls College was honoured by naming the library after him and erecting a statue to him, dressed as a Roman soldier. In November 2020, the governing body of All Souls College announced that they will no longer call their library the Codrington Library, acknowledging that plantations worked by enslaved people were the source of the revenue of Codrington's donations. However, the governing body was not permitted to remove the statue of Codrington, which stands in the centre of the library, as it's a protected Grade 1 listed monument in a Grade 1 listed building, and therefore under government protection. Nevertheless, All Souls College has found an ingenious way round the problem. The statue remains, but a projector has been installed to portray imagery of cracks, damage and graffiti onto the marble statue of Codrington in the library. This is intended to be permanent and is switched on at all times when the library is in use. This would seem to have irritated Codrington's defenders even more than removing the statue, with Robert Jackson saying, "What All Souls is offering is a case not so much of retain and explain, but of vandalise and vilify." There's another statue of Codrington, Admiral Sir Edward Codrington, in St Paul's Cathedral. He carried on the family's tradition of violent colonialism and slave owning. He commanded the fleet that destroyed the Turkish and Egyptian fleets at the Battle of Navarino, and under the terms of the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833, this Codrington was awarded a government compensation of £2,588, 6 shillings and sixpence for the 190 enslaved workers he owned in Antigua. There's no mention of his role as enslaver in the cathedral. But in June 2020, a plaque in Brighton commemorating Sir Edward Codrington was removed following protests after the commemoration of about the commemoration of a slave owner. There's a nice picture in a local paper of the man who owned the building climbing a ladder and personally demolishing the plaque with a club hammer. Yet, Codrington College in Barbados is still named after this family of enslavers. The Codrington College website contains the words, and I quote, "From slaves to monks to students, connected through 300 years, sharing the same masterful views of the Atlantic Ocean, the story of Codrington continues. The Codrington Trust, along with its host country Barbados, both can truly say, the Lord has been the people's guide for the past 300 years. We invite you to come, to join us, and write your name on this page of history. May the House of Codrington forever flourish." The United Society of Partners in the Gospel, as the Society for the Propagation of the Christian Gospel in Foreign Parts is now known, announced last year, the USPG is committed to telling the whole truth about the past, apologising for and representing and repenting of this history and expressing deep remorse for the Society's actions, for the historic damage and also for intergenerational legacies. USPG commits to working in close partnership with the Codrington Trust as the governing body of the Codrington Estate and College. The Codrington Trust advanced proposals for a programme of reparatory activities and an investment of £18 million Barbados dollars. That's worth 7 million sterling over a period of 10 to 15 years. But come on, let's do the maths. 300 enslaved labourers held from 1712 to 1638, that's 126 years. The average wage for an English agricultural labourer at the time was £20 a year. This gives an unpaid wages bill of £7,500, £750,000, sorry, worth £1,700,000 in today's money. So 7 million is chicken feed. But worse, the Codrington Trust has decided how much they will give. This is philanthropy at its worst. Such charity allows the perpetrator to determine the amount and the manner in which the profits of their crime are distributed. The church decides on worthy recipients, not the descendants of the enslaved. Over the course of the project, they say they will engage in a range of research and programming activities. The nearest there is to any economic reparations is assisting tenants living in the estate in acquiring freehold lots in accordance with the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act. Now, this is a law that allows for the purchase of land currently rented at a purchase price governed by the considerations of public policy and the requirements of the Constitution. Now, that's not very generous to the tenants, considering that they've got that right already under the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act. On the 5th of September 2004, the Codrington Trust and the USPG announced their 11-member steering committee to govern and oversee renewal and reconciliation, the Codrington Project. The steering committee will provide guidance for the operation of the project, receiving and reviewing from the executive committee and making recommendations to the two trustee boards. They also say that they are working in partnership, in continuous collaboration, and will listen with descendants of the enslaved to decide on appropriate action for this project, to ensure that those who will be directly implicated are consulted. We've got the words in guidance, recommendations, consultation, but in the end, the Codrington Trust and the USPG will decide. This does not give any control of the fund to these African descended communities. Thus, the money remains firmly in the hands of the Codrington Trust. The church still thinks it knows best on what's good for you. And they haven't even taken the simple step of changing the name of the college. Surely the least they can do. The Barbados government's National Task Force on Reparations have criticised the United Society Partners of the Gospel for not negotiating the terms nor the amounts of payment to them. So we'll leave it with, from David Commisson, Deputy Chair of the National Task Force on Reparations, and he's quoted as saying that organisations such as the USPG should understand that reparations are not about them unilaterally determining what compensation they're prepared to make. And it seems to me that the best way we can move to stop this kind of behaviour is to build a mass movement uniting workers in the Caribbean with workers in Britain to fight for this justice. And Caribbean Labour Solidarity is committed to helping build such a movement. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
You can. Oh, great. Brilliant. Yeah. Oops. Thank you very much for that. I know we can trust you to find some entertaining and informative bits of information in those history books. So thanks a lot. We had several hands up. Maybe they got tired, but we had Cecil has got his hand up, and there was another hand. I see Bentley, you're putting up your hand there. Bentley, you'll be after Cecil. Cecil, how you doing, brother? Cecil, you want to come in?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. Thank you for organizing this. I feel a little bit, I'm not sure, kind of off script. I'm not quite sure, Luke, how you managed on this. I misheard you. to say that the Heirs of Slavery move was fantastic. Steve used the notion peanuts for what they're doing, but even if it wasn't peanuts, it would be insulting. And the fact that we are embracing it strikes me as odd, to say the least. A Bracknell report came out earlier this year, or actually last year, which puts reparations just a part of the enslavement process in the transatlantic enslavement, in the region of between 100 and 120 trillion. And so that indicates what we're really talking about. It doesn't have any figure for continental Africa. It doesn't have any figure for colonialism, and it certainly doesn't have any figure for neocolonialism and neocolonial wicked extraction continues. And so that poses a problem as to whether reparations could in any serious way be engaged in by the system whilst the exploitation in a different form is continuing. So how we are approaching this matter seems to me to matter, and the way we're approaching it seems to me to be very worrying. You're right about Steve's presentation. Bright man who always finds interesting angles of presentation. But in respect of the Church of England, it really is necessary to start with the first Queen Elizabeth, because she was the head of the Church of England, and she did, along as a well-known story, initiate UK involvement in transatlantic enslavement. The figure that the church has come up with is incredibly partial. It's difficult to understand why, accepting as entertainment, Steve talks about Codrington as if it's significant for the African world or even the Caribbean, when in fact we have the figures for what is owed. And so in a way, Codrington and the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel don't really matter at all. So I'm just concerned about how fellow Africans and serious intellectuals who I like and respect are actually approaching these matters, because it's very odd. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Cecil. I'm sure Steve might want to come back with an answer, but I think your criticism of, you thought I support, you well not thought, but I do support that some of the heirs of slavery who have responded to the call for reparations, some have taken the initiative to apologize and pay reparations, and I've clearly criticized that. I think, there needs to be a more structured approach in how these reparations are dealt with. Who's the body being made responsible that they're speaking to, talking to, what agreements they're coming to? Because like you, I think, to just be making unilateral decision about what can be paid, is problematic. But I also appreciate that for many of the who might be heirs of slavery might actually be quite broke. So I think there's a lot of discussions need to be held. And although it is being calculated that there's trillions and so on that is owed, the whole process of going about claiming or getting that surely has got to be through mainly government, who has, engineered, set up this whole system, made sure it operated and worked well for hundreds of years, and they must be held accountable. So whereas, and I personally would put my energies into going after government and so on, and I think I would view the fact that some people are coming forward and making an apology and paying reparations helps add pressure to the government to say, well, what about you? And I think that is important. And for the Church of England, we have, criticize the Church of England and the sums they've paid, and we know that there's people who are saying, hey, it's not enough. And I think is, as you said, some honorable comrades who are on that committee that was formed to look at the funds and how it might be directed have clearly said, you know, it's not enough. Anyway, we've got to, I don't know, Steve.
If I can say something, yes, Cecil. I mean, in one sense, yes, Codrington is very small beer. It's just one example, and I suppose as a historian, I like digging around at this sort of thing, and I think when we're making the argument for reparations, we have to do it on a number of levels. There's quite a kickback, as I mentioned, from some pretty, I think, vile right-wing historians in History Reclaimed who are trying to play what we might call the charity card. You know, oh, they gave some money to charity. You know, well, Pablo Escobar gave money to people as well. You know, despite the fact that he was killing their children. I think that that we have to make these arguments at a number of levels. What's important to me, in one sense, about the church is the more I look at them. What's his name? The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, spoke in Barbados last year, and he made a wonderful speech and a wonderful apology. You know that he was almost in tears on his knees. Did he put his hand in the church's pocket? No, not a penny. And I think that while the question of one of the demands of the reparations movement is for an apology, we have to recognise that the British ruling class are very good at apologising. Oh, sorry about that. Oh, wouldn't have done that. Oh, no. And I think, therefore, when we look at the way these smaller state organisations, and I see the Church of England as an arm of the state. I mean, the King is the head of the Church of England. It's the official church, and it was the official. Then I think we have to, we can learn from that. When as we get closer to getting some near the reparations demand, then we have to work out, well, what are they likely to do? How are they likely to shift it to one side? How are they likely to get out of it? Give us a few crumbs off the table and make an apology and so on. So that's why I kind of do this. And I've always kind of rather liked the idea of Howard Zinn's concepts of people's history, that you look for small signs of resistance where people have fought and won. And that's kind of what I try to do. Sort of, if as an academic historian, I can add something to the argument that people can use elsewhere, then at my age, I think I've probably done something more than I would have done otherwise.
Okay, thank you for that, Steve. Cecil, we'll come back to you. I see your hand is still up. I want to bring in Roberta.
I'll take it down. Sorry.
Yeah. I want to bring in Roberta and then Joseph.
Okay. Thank you. And I wanted to thank you and Comrade Steve for this very important discussion. I had put in the chat a question that I still have, and it touches on what Steve said about the need for negotiations and who's involved in making these decisions. And I asked how we elevate the voices of those persons who most continue to suffer the legacies of slavery. We have a great many people in the Caribbean who can barely afford to finish primary or secondary school. And yet we hear about negotiations to create a new faculty at UWI, a place where very few of our children will actually reach. And while I'm not saying that that's not one possible way of reparations money being spent, I'm really concerned that we're not hearing we're not giving sufficient opportunity to hear the voices of those people who are really the sufferers. You know, even with negotiations, we see like agreements between major museums to return artifacts to the Oba of Benin. You know, artifacts that were made off of the blood, sweat, and tears of enslaved people who were entered into the trade by the direct ancestor of the Oba. And you hear very few objections to, you know, persons like that taking part in the conversations. We really, I'm sorry to go on, but you know, I think it's really of fundamental importance that we hear from the sufferers about how they feel reparations should be negotiated and put and implemented. Thank you.
Can I say, I think you're so right. You're so right there. And it is the only way we're going to get that is with a mass movement from below that actually, because otherwise we know what's going to happen. The kind of the new bourgeoisie of the Caribbean nations will take most of it from themselves, as they've done so far. We need to have now. That's not something that we can do from Britain, but it's something we can support, and it's something we can push by a mass. By trying to make a movement in Britain, by relating, I mean, Luke has said, through the trade unions, through civil society generally in this country. And but it's going to also be a question of those dispossessed people in the Caribbean demanding, as you say, that the money doesn't go to the elite there, but the money goes to improve the lot and the economy and the lives and the health and the education of the ordinary working people, the workers and the farmers of the Caribbean, who are the ones who are the real descendants of the enslaved workers.
Good. Thank you, Steve, for that. And I think you know, I can just back that up in saying that I think it's really important that we get these grassroots little groups going. The real purpose for me about reparations also is about raising people's awareness about the enslavement of Africans, about the African history. We've been denied that history, the majority of us in the Caribbean. You know, when I went to school, I was schooling in the Caribbean in Guyana, and we learned nothing about African history. We started to learn some West Indian history, but people before me just learned about British history. So I think there's a deficit there, and the reparations movement have the opportunity to form small groups of people so they can actually make them aware of why this case for reparations is so important. So we have grassroots movement of people being informed, so they can, in some ways, be able to challenge effectively. The only way we can actually hold the politicians who are so mistrusted, not only in the Caribbean, but all over the world, is by being organized as groups of people. And I would like to see many more groups of reparation fighters joining together, informing and supporting each other. And here in the UK, that we can especially hold the politicians and the British government to account at some point. Okay, I've got a couple of hands up, and I'm going to Joseph Antoine's hand has been up for a while, and then Bentley. Bentley, I see your hand. You'll come next after Joseph. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Luke. And also I want to thank Steve. It's always refreshing to hear Steve and all the other people who have made contribution so far. Now, my difficulty though is how are we going to ensure that all the work that is needed, some of the work needs to be started now or restart. And some of what we hope to achieve will not be achieved maybe in some of our lifetime, but we have to lay the foundation and the groundwork for that. In the light of the fact that Caribbean government and intellectuals have deceived us over the years. For instance, the whole issue of independence. We have been told we are independent only to find out that it was just a new arrangement with the colonizers. So how are we going to ensure that the same thing doesn't happen with those people who might have elected themselves to go and negotiate? And the fact that we need to start thinking about encouraging the cultivation or the education of negotiators and all of that. In the light of that, certain things must be taken into consideration. One is that the ecological debt, the damage to the ecology that have happened over the century, apart from the health, the being mentioned of the health of the human beings, of the African people. So these are things that must be factored in. The continuation, and I think Cecil alluded to that, the continued extraction, like whether it's in tourism, extractive plantation system, tourism, or mining and so on. And then our government going to the IMF and World Bank continues to destroy the possibility of a strong foundation for the future. It's just as how you have the situation where the Israeli and the Americans are destroying any possibility of a real Palestinian state in the future. We need to take those things into consideration. And I know there's a lot more, but one more, let me see.
Thanks.
Yeah, we need to ensure mass participation and not, although in some way I mentioned it, mass participation, and that maybe what is needed is some kind of mechanism where we will seek to get more and more people to discuss, like we are discussing here, and make it one of the key priority issues we discuss going forward, linking all the other issues, including the effect of climate change, the heat, and all kinds of things. Thank you very much for your indulgence.
Thank you very much, Joseph. I think that's important that we, take all of these things into consideration. The ecology, certainly, and much of the lands, many of the islands were depleted in energy, the soil, making it impossible to make a living off of farming in some of the islands, and some work needs to happen there. But it's two separate things in some ways, and the environment that is being damaged continually with global warming and climate crisis that we're in. I see that as a separate issue in a sense. One thing we want to make sure that the crime against our people is paid for. They've also damaged the environment. That's a second crime they have to pay for, and they need to. But we should see them as separate, and the remedies are different. And I think the one way we can do it is by forming groups. And I think for people listening on this that are contributing here to this session, I think is each one taking responsibility really, and I hope that the missions that are supposed to be set up in the Caribbean are already happening, that people are forming groups where they're actually meeting regularly to inform others about the history and about, the steps we need to take. And they've got to be consolidated groups, because that's the only way we're going to hold the politicians to account. We're starting to do that here in the UK, and right here where I live in Islington. We've had one meeting, and we will start to have other meetings. I will get local people involved, and we can each take responsibility for just getting 6 people together to just start to talk about reparations and informing ourselves and informing other people. We can win this battle. Thank you. Bentley.
Yes. I hope you can all hear me. Thank you very much.
How are you doing, Bentley? I haven't seen you for a little while. You've been on
I'm so sorry. Yes, I have some health issues, numerous operations, but still in the struggle.
Oh, good. Good to see you. Good to see you. Welcome back.
When I saw the reminder about the meeting, it said that you're going to discuss the Church of England's announcement of reparation amount. It hasn't been discussed, and I'm a little disappointed in the sense that I promised a number of people, about 8, and one main organization, the Jamaica Diaspora UK, they want to know how they should respond to the Church of England's reparatory payment offer. and I thought I'd come to the meeting and get some kind of consensus as to how we respond to it.
Yes.
Will you then, seeing as it's not being covered today as was promised,
yes.
will it come back as an agenda item?
Yes, I'm sure we can. I'm sure we can discuss it again.
I can give a brief. I cut because things were running a bit late. I cut what I was going to say short. I can actually answer Bentley's question if that's all right. And
well, Steve, you want to hear? If you want to hear my question, then is what should the response be? Is there some sort of general direction that to this Church of England initiative?
Let me say, when they published their research into historic links to transatlantic chattel slavery, this acknowledged the Church's historic complicity in trafficking in enslaved Africans but this was just through profits it had made from a fund known as Queen Anne's Bounty, which was established in 1804 by Queen Anne to help poor Anglican clergy. This fund invested in African chattel enslavement, took donations derived from investments made by the church in the South Sea Company. The church commissioners said they would make £100 million available. And now that is small beer compared to the modern value of the money that the report itself has identified coming from the profits of investments in the South Sea Company. In the period 1704 to 1793, that amounted to 633,000. And by their own calculations, that would be worth £1,361,000 today. So despite admitting the inadequacy of the fund, the report states that our aspiration is that it will invest boldly in black-led businesses whose brilliance will shame a financial sector that has shunned them. We foresee its grants energizing social entrepreneurs and philanthropists. We've clearly been told that the 100 million is all the money that's available, placing the responsibility for the growth of the fund on asset managers who the church will itself select. Thus, we see a totally pro-business orientation of the fund, nothing here for workers and poor farmers. This approach will invest the African Caribbean bourgeoisie and petite bourgeoisie, and the workers will be lucky to get crumbs from the table. Also, the report does not give any control of the fund to African descended communities. Thus, the money remains firmly under the control of the church commissioners. They're quite specific about this. There's no indication that the fund will be used in any way to benefit or help develop the countries of the Caribbean. The bulk of the money will be used in the UK to raise more money. Which will then be used to raise yet more in an endless cycle of accumulation. That's the basis of capitalism. So I think the whole thing is yet another church whitewash. Does that answer your question, at least briefly?
Well, yes. I'm just wondering what do we do if it's? I mean, it's very educational the way you put it. And it shows what is excluded and what is included. That's a bit more pinpointed. But then how as Luke is saying, community getting together, that's what we've done as group to try and explore some of these, what's on the table now. We're looking at people in North Wales that had slavery in Jamaica and engaging with them. And, they're offering to be ameliorative and so on, but not really coming up with anything substantive. But with the Church of England one, I'd like to just report back to people to say, this really is a sort of the view of a consensus meeting I went to with Caribbean Labour Solidarity.
Yes.
Well, I can't give a consensus, but I've given my view of it, if you see what I mean. And I think that we have to reject. We have to reject what they've said.
All right.
Let me just add, Bentley, that I raised concern with one of the officials today, one of the employees really at the Church of England, around this money being stipulated to be spent in the UK, and they try to assure me that that a change is happening, that money will be spent in the Caribbean. But also I know that there's some groups and some people have certainly been able to approach the fund, because the fund, I think it's being managed by a group of people who were selected by the official who was able to set up a team of people who will actually decide who can get what and how. And I guess you can probably write to the Church of England and find out if they can support your group, if there's something you want done or something like that. And I think that's how it's being handled in the UK here. And I'm sure there's some people have actually got some money from it, I know.
Well, I hadn't got a group that was applying. The group was trying to work out what should they advise people who's asking them what they think. Some people think, you know, it's a kind of let bygone be bygone thing, let's go for it. And some people say, no, it's as yourself and Steve has just said. But thanks very much.
Yeah, okay, thank you. We got a couple of more hands up. We've got, I think we had Steve already. Alison, can you come in with your question?
Hi there. So have some questions about this idea of who is it? Who are these organizations and these various commissions that have been set up, right? Because as we discuss the idea of reparations, I live in South Carolina, and I see some of the efforts that have been done or attempts are being made by the Gullah Geechee community, and some of the efforts that have been made, or some of the outreach that has been suggested and is currently happening by the Jesuits who run Georgetown University and the descendants of the enslaved that they sold. So I'm curious as to, is there any effort to form a more global, or to create a more global space, right? Because just in this very short seminar here, we're hearing about the indigenous people. We're hearing, you know, I hear a lot about Barbados and Jamaica. I am Trinidadian. Is it that you're not hearing me? I'm seeing somebody said no audio.
I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you.
So I'm wondering if there have been any attempts to kind of have a network of people or institutions or communities to kind of make sure, because it seems as though if the Church of England is doing something and then the Catholic Church may or may not do something, or, you know, that there are all these kind of piecemeal attempts and what's happening there. And then the other thing that I'm concerned about that I keep hearing is this idea of, well, these people are not doing enough and that people. And while I acknowledge that lots of folks are not doing enough, is it that we are trying to, is it that we are looking for the perfect and having that be the enemy of just start, right?
Yes. Yes.
Because to my mind, just getting people to start thinking about reparations, or start, even if all you have is 2 pennies to give, because whoever, you know, drank out the rest or gambled the rest, as someone else said, you know, should we just start and stop looking for the perfect? Thank you.
Thanks. That's a very good comment, Alison. Thank you. And I think there's a start has been made by CARICOM, because up till now, that's the official body, I would say, that is representing the call for reparations, at least from the Caribbean. And what they've been doing, as far as I can gather, because I'm not part of that group, and I'm afraid my friend Tony, who knows a little bit more than me, is having a little rest. He had a very late night. So, oh, he's listening though. He's having a very late rest. So if I'm saying some misspeaking, you can correct me. But I think that CARICOM is trying to organize the piecemeal way in which reparations are being made. I've seen one letter, I think, from the ambassador for Barbados, who said, you know, it's not okay for people to just be up and saying how much they'll give and where and so on. So they need to have that conversation. Monies have been paid, or reparations has been made through the University of the West Indies, and I think the University of Glasgow has made some arrangement with the University of the West Indies about how they can make reparations. So we know that things are happening. We know it's a global movement that's growing and happening, and I know in the US that some states are making some reparations in some kinds of ways, and whether affirmative action or something, and doing something that they're calling reparations. And yes, we do need a global body really looking at it. And the closest we've come into it really, I think so far, is with the African Union and CARICOM coming together, meeting regularly. I think once a year they're meeting, and they will be taking forward the claim, especially for the ancestors of African heritage. And we need to remember as well that some of the damage, you know, a lot of the damage that was done is in Africa itself. So reparations have to be looked at and paid to African countries who have suffered enormously from their peoples being stripped from the land of their birth. But so thank you. Yes, that's as far as we are with it. We obviously we'll have to revisit this issue again. And as I said, things are changing all the time. We're getting fresh and new information, new insights, and these conversations definitely help us. I see we've come to the end of our time here now on this session at 4 o'clock. And you just have to tune in again. Thanks for contacting us. Write to us, please. You've got our email. You've got our thing, and we try to answer your questions. We can't function without your support. You know, you make us strong. And it's a good time for me to remind people to join us, become a member if you can. And you can visit our website, Caribbean Labor Solidarity. If you Google it, it will come up, and you can get us. And the timer is going. So thank you all again for coming, and thanks to the speakers. Thank you very much, Steve, for preparing. Thanks to Tony, who we've had the opportunity to hear from. And we look forward to welcoming you to the next Sunday meeting in November. It's October now, yes, in November. And thanks to Cecil for your questions, your tough questions, Cecil. We look at them. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Sorry, Marcia, I see your hand came up a bit late.
That's all right. I just sent a message to Steve.
Oh, good. We'll be in touch.
I really thought the information he read, I see that from a very strong educational point of view, and it's needed in the national newspapers here so that it gets a broad consumption by the readership of those newspapers, which are also online and available for, for purchase. So I'd like him to send that information to the national newspapers for publication, if possible.
I might suggest that, given that it's been in the news lately, the whole question of Codrington, CLS executive might issue a press statement. Is often the way to get these things published, rather than me, someone they've never heard of, writing a letter. But we'll talk about that at the executive on Tuesday, and we'll certainly do something about it. But it may be I write a letter, it may be CLS issues a statement.
Steve,
but I think
this is Alison McCletchy here. I'm putting my my professional email in the chat. If you can send me an email. I'm part of the Caribbean Theology Group.
Yeah.
And I know this is one of the things that has come up from time to time in our group, the idea of reparations and the responsibility of the church broadly. And so if we can make kind of professional contact, I might be able to find a space as well for you to talk to our group.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'll be in touch with you before the day is out.
And Martin, I sent you a private email or private message.
Yep, I've got it on Alison McLean. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I've got that.
Okay, great. Bye.
Bye-bye.